So while we're getting mic'd up, I just want to introduce the three. You, of course, have their bios. And starting from my left, your right, we have, of course, Ada Healy, Vice President of Real Estate, Vulcan, and focused primarily, in fact, probably exclusively on South Lake Union, which is a huge project, as you just saw. Ada gave me the first tour of South Lake Union I had back probably 2004, 2005. And she's been leading the company right from the get-go. Peter Calkins, Senior Vice President with Forest City Realty Trust, has been involved since the beginning with, of course, MIT's joint venture, which is now effectively finished. Thank goodness. He's now down here in D.C., down at the Navy Yard, down in a Capitol riverfront, working on that remarkable downtown transformation, downtown adjacent transformation. And then Duke Ryder, who, I'll embarrass him, he's out west. He's got the best name for anybody living out west, Duke Ryder.
But you've got the socks that look very out west.
That's fair, that's fair. Duke, again, present at the creation of this incredible investment in downtown Phoenix, and moving major portions of the university, which is growing to become the largest university in the country. And most of their new expansion over the last 10 years, over the next 50 years, will be in downtown Phoenix rather than their main campus in Tempe. So I'd like to start with this concept of, we found that there's two kinds of communities. Those that are what I refer to as fat and happy, and maybe fat, dumb, and happy. A place sort of like where we are now, DuPont, which has been fat, dumb, and happy for many, many years, thinking that, hey, we're DuPont. We don't have to worry about managing this place. They're finally going to do it, by the way. You'll be happy to know that there's a business improvement district being formed in DuPont after many, many years of effort. But these 6 places were what we call the second kind of place, which is down and out. And I'd like to start with, given the fact that these were all down and out places, what advantages, Ada, did it give you for South Lake Union to be down and out when you started?
Well, that is actually correct. When we were in our early marketing, we had many potential users who told us it was a wasteland, and we couldn't imagine relocating our business there. But in terms of advantages, initially land was very cheap. We were able to assemble larger blocks, and we were talking in the pre-room before. Being quote unquote down and out doesn't necessarily mean there are no community stakeholders there. So there absolutely were community stakeholders there who were interested in what happened in the neighborhood. The other advantage I would say is the city of Seattle, when we really ramped up our development activities, was right post the dot-com bust, and jobs were a huge priority for the city. And so South Lake Union was viewed by us as a place for a new economic engine to deliver new jobs as well as new tax revenue back to our city. It had the capacity to take new development, whereas other areas of town did not. So I would say affordable land, easier to assemble, and generally policymakers who were interested in seeing something happen in this area.
So how about Cambridge, Peter? And this was an industrial section as well, though next to one of the world's leading schools.
Yeah, and that was what attracted us to this project, was that we were confident that located next to MIT, something good was going to happen. I think the advantage that we saw was, or the one we experienced, was that we spent 4 years in a fairly intensive master planning process, trying to envision exactly what this 27 acres would become, working collaboratively with MIT, with the city, and with the neighbors, and the city and the neighbors are not the same thing. To come up with a program that mixed what back then was envisioned as technology space. Now it's all life science, and retail and residential, both market rate and affordable, and most importantly, sort of a network of open space and green connective tissue that would bring it all together. And I think that master plan, which enabled a lot of flexibility, both in terms of timing and in terms of where certain uses ended up. It was very much sort of an early form-based zoning process, but I think that plan stood us well as we then, 4 years in, began to start to develop new buildings.
Mm-hmm. Duke, downtown Phoenix.
Downtown Phoenix, I don't think so much down and out might be the way to describe it, as much as unformed. You've got to remember that post-World War II, Phoenix Metro is a manufactured city based on 20th century technologies, the automobile, air conditioning, and production housing. And with those three things, that area just sprawled like pouring water on a table. So what was the center, what was downtown, what was Phoenix and the 100% corner of Central and Washington, was, given it's the fifth largest city in the United States, relatively vacant, relatively. So when the opportunity to infuse the city with a population, that's what universities can bring, to the downtown area, that appealed very much to the then mayor, Phil Gordon, and the city council, and it was driven by a very ambitious university president who believes that a university, we are the largest, has a responsibility to the area in which it finds itself on every level, whether it's the physical environment, social issues, and obviously around education. And the taxpayers of the city of Phoenix, not the metro area, but just the city of Phoenix, voted to pass a bond election 2-1 in favor of ASU and delivering close to $250 million for us to buy land, city to buy land, build buildings, and bring what's getting close to our goal, which is 15,000 students downtown. Mm-hmm. And not moving students down there in a satellite way, where there's the main campus and a lesser version thereof. We moved whole colleges, and they wondered why they were going, because it didn't look as though this was a place that was going to be a university-like setting. But we moved those that could leverage being in an urban setting. Things like journalism next to the largest newspaper in the state, or nursing next to the hospitals, or public programs and social work. And the law school, I'll conclude, was not in that mix originally, but saw what was happening and realized that's the seat of state, county, city government. They should be there too. And so now it's thriving, and every school that we moved has increased enrollment, in spite of trends that you might see in other areas.
So the interesting thing about catalytic development I found, and that the research showed, is that it was mission-driven, whether that mission be economic development, whether it be social equity, whether it be public health and green space. Ada, how would you define your unique mission of what you were trying to do in South Lake Union?
Sure. Well, when we started thinking about our land that we started out with about 35 acres, which we assembled through the process of a failed park effort in Seattle. Ultimately getting up to 60 acres, we wanted to think about how to develop our property. And so we really came up with 4 goals. One I mentioned previously, we wanted the area to be an economic engine, so jobs and tax revenue were a super high priority for us. We also wanted it to be mixed use, so it was active with people. Ultimately, it's not about bricks and mortar, it's about people. So we wanted both commercial as well as residential and retail. We wanted people on the street during the week as well as on the weekends. We wanted to be very transit and pedestrian friendly, the walkable concept, and we wanted to be leaders in environmental sustainability. And in the early 2000s, that was not on anybody's radar screen. LEED was just getting off the ground, and that was a core value of ours. And so as we laid out those 4 goals for the properties we owned, those were our primary objectives. And I feel pretty good about where we are relative to achieving those objectives. Inclusive development was very important to us. I know we're going to talk about it later, but 15% of our portfolio, South Lake Union and beyond, was developed to be affordable to people at 65 to 85% of AMI. And we have also saved 5 historic buildings in connection with our work. We embrace working with local artists. So we set aside some funds to include an artwork piece in every project. And I could give you more examples, but my panelists probably have some things to share as well. So I'll pass the baton.
Peter, mission.
Well, I found myself representing all three stakeholders up here, MIT and the city and Forest City. I mean, MIT, which really launched this effort by acquiring the land, I mean, its goals were to figure out what to do with this desolate 27 acres right next to its campus where people would go throw their old mattresses on Sunday afternoons, or maybe Sunday night when it was dark. And so they wanted to make a place next door. They wanted to create a place where economic activity that was spinning out of the institution could find a sort of convenient place to land, because all those guys want their businesses and their academic work to be within walking distance to each other. And to MIT's credit, and this often gets ignored, this was an endowment investment on them. They were investing endowment money. They knew it was going to be a long-term play, as Chris said. They were willing to take that bet. I think this was pretty far-reaching on their part in terms of what they were willing to do with university endowment money to try and make something happen. The city, of course, wanted housing, particularly affordable housing, very much wanted tax revenue. University Park is not zoned for academic use, so everybody agreed in the beginning this wasn't going to be an extension of the MIT campus for academic purposes. And they also, partly spurred on by the neighbors, were very interested in making sure that we figured out how do we control the impacts of what we're doing in terms of added density and traffic. We did one of the very first traffic mitigation agreements, I think, around, back in 1985. And then Forest City, which was the third party to the party, if you will, our mission was to figure out how do we implement all of these other missions, and how do we take this desolate piece of land and come up with a program that would enable us to build some critical mass early that would begin to give the place some credence, but then over the long term, could evolve and flower and blossom into what the place has become now. And we share the goals for affordable housing and sustainability that Ada talked about. But it was really about how do you create a place that is a place where people want to come, whether you're a resident or whether you're a company. And at the end of the day, I think we managed to pull it off with the help of a lot of people.
Duke.
Yeah, and if you think about mission, of course, there's the place-based part. And I was a faculty member at MIT for 13 years, so I watched your whole development come about. And when I taught there, I think the students at MIT, and certainly the faculty, thought that's where they should be. In educational terms, in the state of Arizona, there are a lot of people who have never imagined a university education. And our university now reflects the socioeconomic demographics of the state. Well, what better way to communicate that than to be in the community? And so to move downtown and open up vistas of opportunity, especially for some in various demographic areas that just, again, as I said before, never thought that they could be there. We're welcoming them in. They get to know us by being in the city and by not only offering the things that you would expect the university to offer in terms of curriculum downtown. We have turned around some failing schools. We've taken them over and turned them into charters, which we run. We've worked with the city where they see their most prevalent problems with regard to all kinds of social issues, and we wade into those purposely. We're told to do that by our president, and the university wants to do that, and that has produced great results for the city. So the mission-driven starts at the top. What is the university all about? How do we raise up people from their circumstances and give them new abilities to imagine different futures? And by being in a place, being very visible, probably nothing has communicated that more clearly than being downtown. People point to this all the time, how downtown has been transformed, not just by us. We maybe started some things, but billions of dollars of development have surrounded us. But people often point to that as a demonstration of the university's commitment to the community.
So all three organizations are sizable and have great financial resources, but still not enough to pull it off on your own. So who was your most essential partner, whether it be the public sector, institutional partners, major corporations? Who were the ones that were the really essential ones, Ada?
Well, I would have to say absolutely the City of Seattle. Very early on, we've entered into over 10 public-private partnerships with the city, but in the early 2000s, South Lake Union was, was an area that people drove through, not to, and it had not been invested in literally in 50 years. And so there was a significant amount of deferred maintenance. There was no public transit access. The roads were very car-friendly, not very pedestrian-friendly. We didn't have enough power. The parks were dilapidated. And essentially, we needed the city's engagement to help address some of those major infrastructure issues. And so literally over the course of 15 years, a new public transit access was provided via the Seattle streetcar, phase 1. Major roadways were
Which
reconfigured.
you, by the way, helped pay for.
Yes, we paid for 50% paid for by the private sector, 50% by the public sector. Major roadways are reconfigured. The Seattle City Light is building a new substation with a below-grade network. Over $35 million was invested in new parks and open space. And we partnered with the city to build a swale, which cleans 190 million gallons of stormwater coming off a different neighborhood before it flows into our waterways. So there have been over 10 major public-private partnerships that ultimately allowed South Lake Union to become what it became. And in Washington State, TIF, tax increment financing, isn't legal. And so we sort of just did a non-TIF TIF. The city invested, and as well as the private sector, about $750 million in infrastructure. And to date, and this course is going to keep going, the City of Seattle has received $200 million in tax revenue back on that development. And every year, that's more and more and more. So you think about the payback ultimately on their investment, financial investment, and then you also think about the new jobs that have been created, as well as the new housing and other amenities. So I'd say the City of Seattle has been a huge partner. We also have a robust outreach effort to go out into the community, and many community stakeholders came to the table, and we work with to make sure we were providing what the community was excited about, and could have a collective vision. And then lastly, I would say many major institutions, before Amazon came, Amazon's been a huge part of the story, but before Amazon came, there were some major institutions that were early adopters, I would say. The University of Washington School of Medicine was a huge early adopter. We signed our first leases with them in late 2003. Merck Pharmaceuticals actually was an early adopter that came down to South Lake Union. Tommy Bahama, which is actually headquartered in Seattle, Washington, the purveyor of the island lifestyle, hard to imagine, right? They were an early adopter. And the Institute for Infectious Disease Research and Children's Hospital. So those were sort of the first core major employers that rolled the dice and took a bet on South Lake Union. So city, community, as well as some major institutional employers.
Mm-hmm. Ours was clearly MIT. We've now been effectively partnered with MIT for 35 years, which is a pretty long track record. The structure of the agreement that we had with them gave us essentially 20 years to develop the place out. As long as we started a building within 5 years, we didn't have a specific timeline we had to adhere to. So that helped us get through a couple of economic cycles that were a little challenging. All the buildings are on ground leases. MIT's continuing role is as landholder and ground lessor. But the ground leases were structured in a way that, in the early days, they were affordable. And, MIT's reward would come later. And given where rents are in Cambridge, everybody's finally reaping those rewards. We didn't have any, Cambridge was a partner in terms of their sort of professional approach to what we were trying to do. And Cambridge has a great planning department and a good planning board and a great staff. And for 30 years, a very dedicated city manager. But we didn't have there was no third-party money in this other than MIT's sort of patient money. Any infrastructure that needed to go in, Forest City paid for. as part of the project. There's no TIF, there's no tax abatement. This was definitely a private sector initiative if you count MIT as private sector. So.
Yeah, and ours, based on what I previously said, obviously the city of Phoenix and the investment they made in allowing us to establish this campus and everything that goes with it. But preceding that, and you got to remember that the metro area is something of an archipelago of cities. There's Scottsdale, there's Tempe, there's a variety of things. They decided, and it was very much supported by the federal government, probably 80% plus, to put in a light rail system that went all the way on the east from Mesa through Tempe, where our major campus is, through downtown Phoenix, and north, and headed out to where our football stadium is, which you can argue whether it should have been located all the way out there. There it was. But had that thread not been woven through the fabric of the metro area, the logic of saying, downtown Phoenix and where our main campus is in Tempe, which, by the way, is booming in terms of development as well, wouldn't have had the same logic. It provided that logic, and people could imagine people now moving without an automobile in a place that couldn't be more auto-centric. But that was crucial to us, and we purposely located the new campus right where the primary multimodal area is in downtown Phoenix. And our students, I think, in many respects, showed people how to use public transportation, at least that form of it. And so that investment was absolutely crucial. And then thirdly, turning it around with regard to Peter's story, third-party developers were saying, are you really going to do this? Because if you're really going to build a campus down there, we're probably going to buy this land over here, and we're going to do this. And I remember many discussions with the private sector, a little bit surprised that this was all going to happen. And we had confidence the bond election was going to pass, and they have followed through. And so the mixed-use development around us, and now multiple thousands of housing units surrounding the campus area have been even more transformational with regard to the larger downtown area than just what we've been doing. And our colleagues from the University of Arizona have put a lot into their medical school downtown, too.
Now, besides the reason that ASU is such an incredible success story with downtown Phoenix, the other reason that we wanted ASU as part of the 6 is because it's the only public sector institution doing this of the 6. I think it's interesting to note that 5 of the 6 are private sector-led efforts. Not that the public sector wasn't deeply involved, but it was what I refer to as not a public-private partnership, but a private-public partnership, which is flipping that term. So I think that's quite significant, but it can be done by the public sector with the proper leadership.
And we've had many universities approach us. I think our colleagues at the University of Central Florida are saying, hey, could we do in Orlando what you did here? And I've been out there multiple times. They are saying, we're going to do what you did. We're going to copy that step by step. San Antonio, University of Texas San Antonio is talking about how they can be in downtown. So the idea that a university can be a driver of development downtown is now, I think, commonly understood, and it's different than maybe sports stadiums or other things. It brings bodies, it brings people and life to a city.
In other words, employment, which is one of the 3 major factors that we found. Now, we've touched upon this before, but the issue of social innovation is really important with these projects, and that we've seen this really brought to the fore by all 6 of these case studies, looking at the connection between the local community and the project itself, particularly regarding affordable housing, workforce development, and those kinds of issues that are now just raising its head so tremendously throughout this country. Ada, how do you, particularly in Seattle, which is one of the poster child of trying to create inclusive development?
So we've done a couple of different things. When you think about affordable housing, there are really 2 different buckets. There's what I would characterize as workforce housing, which is say for people at 60% of AMI and above, to low-income housing, which is folks generally below that, but maybe at 30%, 30 plus or minus. And so we have essentially played in both those spaces in different ways. We have delivered as part of our portfolio roughly 15% affordable housing, so workforce housing, which is for people at 65 to 85% of area AMI. And in South Lake Union, we essentially delivered more of that workforce housing than any other developer combined. So I feel really great about our track record there. In addition to that, we have also contributed through incentive zoning fees to pay into a pool that the city uses to invest in low-income housing. And so we've contributed in connection with some rezoning about $11 million toward low-income housing, which the city then disperses to low-income housing developers, and they take that money and they leverage it with tax credits, with philanthropy, with low interest rate loans. The third piece of it, which is not a direct housing production, but given all the new employment opportunities, I mean, there are employment opportunities for highly skilled workers. There are employment opportunities for people just starting out, and for people perhaps who are not as far along on the skill spectrum. And so new jobs affords people an opportunity to earn a living, which then ultimately will cover the cost of housing. But it's something that we care deeply about. The other point I would make on the philanthropic side, which is not where I focus, but on the philanthropic side, Paul Allen, who's my boss, cares deeply about affordable housing, and we have a number of projects in the Seattle area that are specifically targeted toward homelessness. We as a company actually built 30 tiny homes 2 weeks ago, partnering with a nonprofit housing developer, and those tiny homes will be delivered. They have been delivered. They're going to be open in July, which will house 50 to 60 homeless individuals. The last point I would make is we are also partnering with Mercy Housing and the City of Seattle on a new homeless housing project, which will include about 100 units. We're investing $30 million into this project. It's going to break ground in July or August, and it's going to have a very large family services center on the first floor. So affordable housing and homelessness is something that Paul Allen cares deeply about, and we're addressing it both on the for-profit side of our business through the areas that I've mentioned, as well as on the philanthropic side of our business.
Peter.
Clearly, the affordable housing. I mean, our original zoning committed us to build 400 residential units, of which 150 would be affordable in a mix of low and moderate. So that's like 37%, which was far and above any level that anybody was ever committing to, certainly back then. We ultimately converted some commercial square footage to residential square footage and built 600 and something units. But that original commitment was very strong, and we also delivered, the projects that had the affordable units in them, which was several, got delivered early on. So it's not like that piece came late. It was an early commitment. I've talked about the sort of traffic mitigation. I think we've worked hard to try and manage the impacts, positive and negative, if you will, of that kind of a new growth in an existing working class neighborhood, the Central Square, previously known as Central Scare area of Cambridge. And the other point I would highlight, and it's less true for University Park than it is for projects, our sort of follow-on catalytic projects in East Baltimore next to Johns Hopkins Medicine and also here at the Yards, is a very, very strong commitment to minority and local business development and workforce development, both not only on the construction side, but on the soft consultant side. And then as a follow-on, once businesses get up and operating, we have a really aggressive program for how do we make sure that we can bring people into the workforce and give them the skills they need, and get our big corporations to mentor the little corporations and do all that kind of activity. So,
Duke, obviously ASUs, that's your mission,
right?
To educate the
Yes,
young and in particular first generation college.
Absolutely. So while we may not be able to speak to the issue of affordable housing, we're not developers. Given what the city did for us to make it possible for us to be there, we feel this need to demonstrate the value of being there. So examples would be, I mentioned one already, there was a large but failing school right next to us. We took it over, turned it into a charter. It's now graduating at the 99% level, all of its students with 70% going on to some form of higher education. Some at ASU, some at the community college level, but that is a remarkable turnaround in the profile of the students there. Their families probably have average incomes, if they're coming from, say, South Phoenix, $22,000, $24,000 a year. So I think we're proving that anyone can learn. But because our students are in a downtown setting, they're also seeing the world differently. They even say that. They say they carry themselves different than those on the Tempe campus because they're seeing their futures and what they'd like to do. So our School of Nutrition students commandeered a bus, in a good way, took over a bus and filled it with fruits and vegetables, and they addressed the food desert issue in that area. And so they are actively addressing something that they saw and doing it. And the last thing I would say, right adjacent to the campus, right out the windows of the College of Public Programs, is a building filled with Section 8 housing. Wasn't built for that. It was an old hotel. And there were constantly ambulances and fire trucks in front of that building, serving the needs of the people who live there. And we made that observation, said, I think we could help you with that. So we put facilities in the ground floor of that building where students are getting a practicum who are in that field addressing the issue in the building. The number of emergency vehicles there has been reduced. That's what a university should do. You were good to us, taxpayers and others, to bring us here. Now we need to demonstrate the value of that adjacency.
Karen is now going to take some questions. We have about 10, 12 minutes for questions. One thing that just occurred to me, go ahead, Karen. One thing that just occurred to me as we were talking up here, that all 6 of these people that you have heard from, that you will hear from, this is their peak career moment in their lives. I mean, all 6 of these people have really have dedicated themselves.
You mean it's all downhill from here?
This is your peak. Enjoy it, guys.
Brookings, we made it.
I didn't see that on the agenda.
I know, but it just occurred to me. I mean, you all threw your entire career at these projects. This wasn't just, oh, I'll be here for 2 years and then go on to something else.
They're long term.
These are long-term commitments of their career, and this is their peak career experience, played out over decades. And for better or for worse, you guys did it. Thank you. So.
Okay, this is a comment, not a question.
Let's keep them to questions. Please ask it as a question.
Was if you think back on the model for corporate campus, when the planning started for University Park at MIT, it was a bunch of buildings out in a green field off an interstate. And I think what Forest City did is absolutely brilliant in terms of creating an entirely new model for that. So that's it.
You'll take that. So a question, please.
I'm intrigued by the concept of MIT being considered private sector, but so my question is actually, do any of your facilities pay real estate taxes? Because one of the issues is, as this is going forward, whether it's Amazon 2 or whatever, is property tax breaks, which sometimes are very long-term and don't contribute to the, and in effect, it picks winners and losers within those communities. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking University of Arizona doesn't pay taxes. I'm thinking MIT Endowment doesn't pay taxes. Nope. And I suspect ultimately your property did.
Why don't we start with Ada?
Taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a private sector developer. We pay real estate taxes, and every year, because assessed values have gone up, our real estate taxes have gone up. The certain nonprofits in Seattle do qualify for some tax break, and we can't. Some we have commercial tenants that are for profit, and we pay those taxes. And if you're a nonprofit tenant and you qualify via the city's tax code, then you're exempt from property taxes. But we generally pay taxes.
Mm-hmm. And all of our buildings pay full 100% taxes. We're one of the largest taxpayers, certainly in the city of Cambridge. I think I don't know what it is now, because I don't track that anymore, but it's $13 or $14 million, including, we have one building, and parts of another that are leased to the Partners Healthcare System, which is the umbrella over Brigham and Women's Hospital and Mass General Hospital. And they located a research facility in University Park because they wanted to do some joint programs between the two hospitals, and they needed Switzerland. They needed neutral territory, if you will. And so since 2000, they made that decision. They pay full real estate taxes, just like any other corporation in the park. As long as, in Cambridge, as long as the building is owned by a private sector entity like us, then it pays real estate taxes, no matter who's in it.
And Duke, I just assume that ASU does not pay taxes.
Obviously we don't, but first Phoenix joined in partnership with us to do what we did. Then Scottsdale raised its hand and said, we'll invest this in some vacant land, which was achieving no tax revenue, and we came in there, and now private companies are in there working with us and others, and Mesa just the other night passed a vote to bring us there as well. They'll make a modest investment, but I think they believe that the ROI on us being there and the knowledge creation, I think was on your chart, it was where the future is. The return is highly qualified and valuable to those cities.
I'm curious about the place for small retail businesses and related small developers. And I'm asking because of several things I've read recently. One concerns South Lake Union, where a longtime Seattle resident was despairing of the loss of some small businesses that she enjoyed having when she passed through South Lake Union that are now gone and have been replaced, basically gentrified with, more upscale type businesses. And also, I've been reading about how many developers are now, when they build mixed-use buildings, are putting in very large retail spaces that are unsuitable for anything but, say, a large chain. And I'm also, as I said, I'm curious about, is there a place in any of this for a small developer who may want to build, a not huge building that could accommodate, say, small businesses and some more affordable housing as well?
Sure. Let me address that. In our retail strategy, we have tried to find either local or regional tenants to come take space in our buildings. We do have a Whole Foods, which of course is a national company. We do have Starbucks, which is a national company, although they are headquartered in Seattle, so they're the hometown brand. But we have bent over backward to find local businesses to come and lease retail space in South Lake Union. We don't lease. We don't put banks on corners. Some of our competitors do. We don't think that creates a great retail environment. We have built smaller retail units, which of course the rent is lower because it's less square footage. And the good news is, while it isn't perfect because we do have some national tenants, we have a lot more diversity in terms of the retail experience in our portfolio than I would say is perhaps more typical. I will tell you the downside of that is during the Great Recession, every retail tenant we had, except for Starbucks and Whole Foods, I think was on rent relief. So they weren't paying rent. Maybe they were paying operating expenses. That was the risk that you run by not bringing in national chains. But we have tried to bring in local operators, whether it's Portage Bay, whether it's the local coffee guy who actually invented the little swirl on the top of your lattes. He's world famous. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Cafe Vivace is his store. Whether it's a local toy store, or Cactus, which is for Mexican food. But we have tried to bring in a diverse portfolio of retailers.
We've taken very much the same approach, with all of the street front retail. We did have a supermarket, which has recently closed because there's too many supermarkets that have opened up in the area now, and it was on the second story. hard to run. But all of the street front stuff is local. I mean, I'll tell one little story. In about 1995, we had a guy who was working in a food truck that was kind of parked on the place. And the food truck operator was shutting down, and he came to us and said, you know, I can make this work if you give me a space that's inside. And so we leased him 700 feet. This is a guy from Africa. His name is Mohammed Mamadou. And, you know, we helped him get started. I testified when he got his green card. I wrote half a dozen letters at various points over the years when he wanted to bring his mother across to visit. There was a Facebook post, you know, 2 weeks ago of his son who just got his degree in criminal science from Northeastern University, who I knew this kid when he was this big. So, you know, that's just another sort of, it's a microcosm story of the kind of effort that we've made to help the small and the local community grow and thrive and prosper.
I could give you some examples, but why don't you go to another question from the
Final question was in the back. Calvin.
Calvin Gladney, Smart Growth America. You guys have definitely shown great economic and fiscal impacts and community benefits from your projects, although many communities may not necessarily have had the same great history as with your companies. So my question would be, on the front end, do you see a role of mechanisms like value capture, community benefits agreements, form-based codes, master plans with teeth, the types of things that the public sector and communities are looking to do that might guarantee some of the impacts that you guys made sure happened, but do it on the front end?
I think we had a master plan with teeth. You know, we had essentially form-based zoning that allowed higher density towards the MIT campus side of the property and lower density and lower height towards the community side. We had thresholds that we couldn't pass in terms of development until we could demonstrate that we had both delivered on the affordable housing side and also on the open space side. So we very much had that from the beginning in terms of teeth to make sure that we would adhere to what we said we would do.
Calvin, as you probably know, that Cambridge is the socialist state of Cambridge. So,
yes. Otherwise known as the People's Republic. Not so much anymore.
It's interesting as to how much you could insert into, whether it's regulations or expectations or documentation, and that has value. As much as faith you might have in that, as the leadership of maybe, so let's say, an institution like a university or a developer, people need to follow through on those things, even though they're codified in paper. It depends a lot on people. And is that in their interest to do it? Do they want to do it? Do they feel that it's part of they're not just an obligation, it's where they want to be. It's what they want to do. I think that matters a lot.
and keep in mind, these are generational projects. So it's not as if you're, up front, you get a guarantee, and then all of a sudden, 20 years later, I mean, there's a whole different set of people, except for these 6 that are still there. But generally speaking, this is more like a marriage than like a deal. It's a long-term process. So I want to please join me in thanking.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.